Hey, this is Zachlog the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Nate, who is further declining to show his face.
I mean, you got to do something for the fans. This is the best favor I can think of.
And also with my friend Travis.
Hello, everyone.
And we are joined tonight by Corey J. Mahler, who is half of the team behind the Stone Choir podcast. I doubt there's anyone who's listening to me who hasn't heard of you, but if you would like to, explain that a little bit.
Of course, thank you for having me on. The Stone Choir podcast is a Christian podcast. We go over theology, politics, social issues, basically all of the major issues that are currently facing the church and the West.
Okay. And they shoot for weekly. Don't always make it, but if it is not out, if it is not out weekly, it is still worth the wait when it arrives. And we are getting together tonight to talk about Rudyard Kipling's poem, The Children's Song. Before we get to that, just a couple of things. One is my usual. If you like my work, you like my channel, you'd like to support me, you can go to subscribestar.com/Zachlog-the-great and sign up to support me there. Wasn't planning to do this, but it's rather too relevant recently. Last year, I wrote a short novel titled "The Mayor of Christ Mountain," in which a white father sees his young son, murdered for basically no reason by a black neighbor. And the rest of the book is what the father does in response to that. That's the sadly that story is still relevant. And if you're watching recent events and are rather disheartened by them, and you would like you would like to see how the story might go a different way, including how the father reacts, you might check out that book. You can actually read it free online, and I'm going to put the link in the description, or you could, if you like it enough, you could buy a copy on Amazon. Anyway, having said all of that, I am going to step out of the way for a moment. I'm going to put the poem up on the screen, and Corey has volunteered to read it for us tonight. So let me know when you guys see that.
It's there.
Okay.
Land of our birth, we pledge to thee our love and toil in the years to be, when we are grown and take our place as men and women with our race. Father in heaven, who lovest all, O help thy children when they call, that they may build from age to age an undefiled heritage. Teach us to bear the yoke in youth with steadfastness and careful truth, that in our time thy grace may give the truth whereby the nations live. Teach us to rule ourselves alway, controlled and cleanly night and day, that we may bring, if need arise, no maimed or worthless sacrifice. Teach us to look, in all our ends, on thee for judge, and not our friends, that we with thee may walk uncowed by fear or favor of the crowd. Teach us the strength that cannot seek, by deed or thought, to hurt the weak, that under thee we may possess man's strength to comfort man's distress. Teach us delight in simple things, and mirth that has no bitter springs, forgiveness free of evil done, and love to all men neath the sun. Land of our birth, our faith, our pride, for whose dear sake our fathers died. O motherland, we pledge to thee head, heart, and hand through the years to be.
Okay, thank you. And let me get that off of the screen. Okay, so Nate, would you like to kick off with your thoughts about the poem tonight?
Certainly. My first thought is there are no children that pray like this. Like, I understand where he's going with it. It just kind of made me laugh. I was like, man, kids were different back in the day, I guess. But overall, I mean, this is a very manful set of desires. It's a very, upright and strong, prayer to pray that, hey, make me strong, make me upright, make me wise and kind, so that I can, make the world a better place, starting with my home. And I think it's very proper to want these things, I'm going to look to myself and be upright and true. And then I'm going to look to, those around me, use, and comfort their distresses. I'm going to be an asset to my people and my nation. And it's a wonderful sentiment to hear in this degraded and selfish time. There's no victimhood here. There's no glorification of weakness. It's just, I want to be clean and strong and upright. We need to be teaching more people this.
And yeah, I found it to be really nice, very beautiful. I loved, Father in heaven, teach us, and just that repeated, teach us, a humility and a desire to be good, basically. The one problem that I did have with the poem was the first and last stanzas. I guess the part about the homeland and sort of a nationalism in the first and last stanza kind of threw me a little bit. It kind of felt like the king said, "Hey, write me a poem that really does our country good," and then he wrote this really sort of moving and spiritually inclined poem, and then stuck the first and last stanza in there to pay homage to this, this other thing. Now, as Nate spoke about it, I kind of got the sense of, oh, it's not quite that dramatic, and it does speak to the land, but that was the problem I had with the poem, was it just the first and last stanzas kind of lost me a little bit in a poem that was basically spiritual otherwise.
Yeah, so I memorized and recorded this poem maybe a couple of years ago now. I'm not sure about the date without looking it up, but I remember the primary thing I was thinking, like when I was learning this, when I was going over it again and again, is just, I'm really sad that, like, for my country as it is today, like, I don't think I could teach my kids this. I don't think I could teach them, like, hey, you've really got to stand for, this country, and, patriotic, and, love, you know, be ready to go out and fight for it, because this country is, like, I believe, I agree with the sentiment, but at the same time, it's like the government and so many aspects of the culture are so corrupted. It's like, it's hard to, like, sell yourself on, like, standing for these things, and it's frustrating, because, like, this is what you should, this is, I think this is an honorable, healthy way to think. It's just like, in our case today, it's pointed at something that's questionably deserving of loyalty, I guess you could say.
Well, I mean, to come back at that and to, continue to rep the poem, are you going to be able to overcome the degeneracy of the culture that you so despise by allowing it to fall to more degenerate culture? Because that's really our only option. I mean, there's no one out there doing better. And so that's sort of the issue we're faced with, is that, yeah, I'm not I'm not happy with our culture. I want it to change. I want to change it. I'm raising half a dozen young men that are going to go out there and look very different from their peers because they're going to have, honor and strength in their hearts instead of, victimhood and TikTok. But it's, like I said, our society has degenerated a lot from its height. But at the same time, you can either become a godless communist or some kind of Euroqueer, but there's not a whole lot of other ways to go. We're still, sadly, even in our greatly diminished state, the high watermark, I think. And so we have to try and claw back our culture, and then hopefully by doing that, raise the tide that raises everyone else's ships and start raising their cultures too. I don't know if it's possible, but we have to try.
I don't think I'd necessarily say that the first and last stanzas are out of place, because the entirety of the poem is just run through with Christian themes. There's references to scripture all over the place. I jotted down a number of them as I was going through the poem. But you see this hierarchy that he rightly recognizes, that you have various duties to various people depending on your relationship to them. And so you have a duty to your race, which he recognizes very early on there. And one thing that I thought that was interesting and worth noting is that he says, land of our birth. Well, Kipling wasn't born in Britain. He wasn't born in the UK. He was, in fact, born in Bombay. And yet he would still reference the UK as the land of his birth, because he means something more than just his personal birth from his mother. He means the birth of his race. He means the birth of these things that matter. And so that's why he can still call it the land of his birth, despite the fact that he was born in India, which is an interesting tidbit if you know that about the author, which some people probably don't know, that he was born in India. So it's something worth mentioning when you go through this poem. But like I said, the whole thing has scripture throughout. You could practically assign references to scripture to every single one of these stanzas, and not just the New Testament, which is always nice to see someone actually using the Old Testament. You have Lamentations in there, you have Leviticus in there, you have the Psalms. It's very interesting to see. And it brings up a point that we've made on Stone Choir and I've made elsewhere. If you read through Western literature and you do not know the scriptures, you are effectively illiterate, because you are going to miss huge chunks of meaning. For instance, if you don't understand the references to scripture in this poem, you're going to miss part of it, because what does it mean when it says no maimed or worthless sacrifice? It's a reference to the sacrificial system and the fact that you had to bring lambs and rams and bulls without blemish. It is an offering brought to God of the best of the first fruits, as opposed to the lame of the herd or the flock.
Yeah, and it's I was gonna say, in terms of reading Western literature without understanding the Bible, it's it's a little bit like going to see a 3D movie and you don't have the 3D glasses. Like, there's just enormous parts of it that you're missing, and every once in a while they'll do something up on screen that you're like, what was the point of that at all? Because there are parts of a 3D movie that in 2 dimensions just don't make a lot of sense. Although I actually, I don't know if I've ever watched one, but anyway, it's an analogy. So what was it was actually kind of funny when I was when Corey had mentioned this one and I went to reread it. I was thinking, there are, to a lot of people, I think, in our today, they would read this and anyone just center right all the way to crazy leftists is going to read this and feel fascist is going to be a reaction. That's just what they're, a label that is immediately going to that alarm is going to ring in their heads. And it's Yeah, because, they're trying for a healthy, orderly, decent society and saying people have duties. How terrible.
Well, I mean, yeah. I could kind of taste that note of nationalism that Travis is talking about earlier, but here's the deal is that I don't disagree with it. I'm like, no, your country has invested resources in you, especially if it's a free society. And it's your duty to that society, to that nation, to repay that when you're called on. I mean, do you have to agree with everything? No. Do you have to like everything about your country? No. But you are a product of that country. And like I said, there have been things that you would not have if you weren't in that country. Now, I'd probably feel different if I was some poor Ugandan who's never been given anything in my life. But, I'm an American, and America has given a lot to me. Now, do I start to question the value of some of those things sometimes? Yes. But do I question the value of America as a thing? Absolutely.
Well, and, the other thing with that is, like, it also goes back to a question of, what is your conception of a country and what is your conception of a nation? And, if you're on the political right, not left or libertarian, at least a part of that is going to be connected to the idea of family. And why do you love your family? Is it because they're the best people around? Is it because like they have everything sorted out and they're great guys? Not always. Sometimes you're really frustrated with your family, but you love them because they're your family, and that's actually how it's supposed to be. If that's not there for you, something has gone very badly wrong. Either maybe with the rest of them.
What C.S. Lewis talks about in his lecture on the obstinacy in belief, which I think comes from Mere Christianity, is that, this obstinacy in the face of anything that would try and rise against, Christian faith is seen as a virtue, regardless of what the countervailing idea is. And no matter how attractive or how, logical or interesting it looks, you have to believe that, Christianity is right no matter what. And we have to hold and cling to that very, very tenaciously. And it's the same thing with family. There should be an obstinacy in our affection for our family. And there should be this obstinacy in our affection for our home, our nation, our land. Because, without it, we fall to treason.
And like I said, there are other ways people look at this question, and like a lot of people today, and some of them at very high levels of power, seem to think of the United States not as a nation, not as connected by blood and heritage and history, but basically the United States is an economic zone, and however we get the most economic productivity out of it, that's how we're going to win. And as is the phrase on this show, to get back to the poem, if you take that kind of approach, like what Kipling is talking about here makes no sense. If the point of the nation is maximum economic productivity, if that is what the nation is, then like all of this is like, I don't know how much we need that.
And at that point, you're a freaking globo homo, and we got problems. Me and Alex Jones don't like you very much. But no, it's like I said, and like we've been discussing, this is a set of virtues. Is really what this is. It's pleading make me virtuous so that I can be of use to those around me. And that is a slap in the face of modern ethics, which is a a hilarious contradiction in terms. But it's a slap in the face of this, me first, extreme individualistic, idea that we've burdened ourselves with. In that, yeah, it's not make me good so I can be the best. It's not make me strong so that I can, get over and, accomplish my dream. This is all very, very much a plea, make me useful. And honestly, I think if more people worried about just being a useful individual rather than being a lauded individual, we'd get a lot further. That would be a huge break on the degeneracy that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and it's one interesting thing for me, like with it's stanza 4. Teach us to rule ourselves all way, controlled and cleanly night and day, that we may bring, if need arise, no maimed or worthless sacrifice. And again, C.S. Lewis reference. One thing he talked about. Why does morality matter? Why do I, need to be a good person? And he says, well, as long as I don't, one thing people say about this, one way people look at this is, look, as long as I'm not hurting other people, I should be able to, live my life like I want. And it's like, well, kind of, maybe, but there are things you do that, he used the analogy of a ship. And it's like, if the ship is sufficiently poorly maintained, internally, it's not going to be able to steer and drive properly, and it's going to end up either crashing into another ship or into a dock. You can't treat yourself however you like. There are certain things that you do that are going to warp you in ways that are destructive, not just to you, not that that's okay, but not just to you, but to other people around you. And it's not something you can opt out of. It's, the nature of the way we're built.
Yep.
One of the fundamental differences between the right and the left politically is how we handle this specific issue here, which really it's defining what is the good. For the left, and for practical purpose, we can class basically all libertarians under the left for this. For the left, it is, what do I enjoy doing? What do I want to do? What is the thing that makes me happy? That is how they define good. It's the reason that they can defend things like transgenderism and all manner of other degeneracy, because it is only the individual for them that is the arbiter of what is good or bad. And it is individualized good, to abuse the word good really, but certainly lowercase g. Whereas for the right, at least for the upper portion of that quadrant, so the authoritarian right, there is a good. There is an absolute good. There is an uppercase G good. And it is to that standard that we judge things. It is against that standard that we judge things, and to which we attempt to hold things. And so something is good if it is objectively good, not if it is subjectively or personally good. This is a huge dividing line between the right and the left. And it's something that you can't bridge. All you can do is convince someone who is on the left that his standard of good is wrong, that it's morally abhorrent. You have to have an objective standard of what is good. And then if you have that objective standard, the goal is to live up to that standard. And part of that is being a productive, a useful member of society. Because you have duties not just to yourself, which you do have some duties to yourself, but you have duties to your family, you have duties to your nation, you have duties to your neighbor, you certainly have duties to God, because basically all duties ultimately are to God. But these are things that you have to pursue, and there are objective standards for them. You don't just get to pick whatever you like when you go through life. That would not be living a moral life. And in the end analysis, it's also not good for the individual to live that sort of inward-looking, solipsistic life. Because if you do that, you're inevitably going to pursue things that are not good in and of themselves. They are not right ends.
Yeah, and it was one thing, actually, one of the very first things Nate said. He said, "What is it? Well, I don't think any children actually pray like this." And as a father, I'm like, yes, he has a point, and this is kind of interesting to me because I grew up in a Grace Brethren denomination, um, and like we didn't really have prescribed prayers as such. That wasn't something I was familiar with, like growing up that much. Um, and so, like when you prayed, you were talking to God in mostly your own terms, your own thoughts. And a few years, well, geez, about a decade ago, I guess I converted to a different denomination, which does include that, and like which does include prescribed prayers. Pray this, and it took me a while to kind of understand it. And there is a certain criticism which I think lodges. I think there's some validity to it because Jesus says don't do like the pagans do and just say the same thing over and over again, and it doesn't mean anything. I'm like, well, that does look a little bit like it, but at the same time, this children's song isn't what children are going to ask, but it's maybe what part of the point of prescribed prayers are these are things you should think about. These are things that should be in your mind. So we're going to have you, go through this, and use that to remake your mental landscape. You there's a I don't know where this comes from, and now that I think about it, I'm vaguely suspicious of the source. But there's a saying I've heard a few times. It's you become what you behold. You become more like what you pay attention to, and saying a prayer like this, having children having children go through this would reshape them at least to some small degree to be a little bit more like it, and that's not a that again is a somewhat a rejection of the individualistic ethos of our modern era. So.
I used to take that whole thing that Jesus said about don't pray like the pagans do, just with just blind repetition. But yeah, that's more like just the chance. And just being like, I'm just going to say this one thing enough. Your idea about this whole thing about prescribed prayers is, yeah, it is. It's a template. And it's like, it's a stencil. It's like, form. That's what I'm after. It's like concrete forms. I'm going to frame this in, and then I'm going to fill it with a bedrock of faith so that I can make something out. And, sometimes you want to be able to build just, whatever frame you want for your prayer. But other times the discipline of those things is good. Like, I mean, Jesus himself prescribed a prayer. He said, when you pray, say this. And he gives us the Lord's Prayer. And it's a template for how to communicate with the Lord, Humble yourself before him. Praise his greatness. Ask for forgiveness. Forgive everyone who has wronged you. Then, at the end of it, if you have a need, talk about it. But first, remind yourself who this is and what you were doing. Understand that the aspects of forgiveness are more important than the aspects of provision. And honestly, when I pray in that format, I find myself often enough, by the time I get to the part where I should be asking for things, where I meant to get, I'm like, you know what? I'm reassured. I'm peaceful. I don't need to be like, Lord, the bills. by then I'm already like, you know what? I'm in your hands, Lord. You will do what is necessary. You will give me opportunities to earn, or you will just bring blessings into my life. However you choose to do it, it'll arrive, and I thank you for that. And so I guess in the end, this prayer is trying to do the same thing. You know, it's trying to say that if you follow this template, you will arrive at these things. And so I like this. I really, really like this. I was kind of bland on it the first couple of times I read it, but now they've been talking about it. I feel like this is a very excellent thing.
Well, and another thing with this poem, and this was written. Do we have a date? It's here. Let me see if I can find it. I mean, published 1906. So written early 20th century. And I grew up in the late 20th century, and it's interesting looking at this because in terms of the way that children grow up today, and the way children grew up 30 or 40 years ago, the idea that we're getting you ready to be an adult, that we're preparing you for something, and that you're going to have that you need to be ready for this stuff. Like when I was growing up, in some ways, like, okay, we have school, but like in a lot of ways for children that idea is almost absent today, and that's really creepy. Like it's really destructive, and I guess it's kind of like here, have sugar every day, just have lots of candy every day is the kind of thing that are the spiritual, it's the spiritual diet of children in America for the last 50 years. And I look at this and I'm like, oh, this is the kind of food that children are supposed to be eating. I don't think I got much of this.
Eat your
Admittedly,
son.
Sorry, go ahead.
Son, if you don't eat that spiritual broccoli, you're going to grow up to be a Democrat. Do you want to grow up to be a Democrat and wear that stupid pink hat and cry about things?
I was going to say it depends on which decade of Democrats. And which part of the country.
Yeah. I think 5, 6, and 7, I think, are really the stanzas that bring it home to me. Because it's like, hey, yeah, we need to look to the external standard, not, whatever, but not like society's external standard. Teach us to look in all our ends on thee for judge and not our friends. That we're not going to be worried about what the people around us think, that our morals aren't going to be based democratically, that they're going to be based, on bedrock truth. And, that we want to be strong, not so that we can hurt people, but that we can be a comfort and a help, that our strength would be used to save and protect and build up. And then I love, teach us to delight in simple things. Because if you do that, there is no amount of loss that can sink you into despair. Like, I know people that, like, if they lost their very fancy car and their internet access, they would probably kill themselves. Because that's what they've got. They need the fancy, they need this complexity, they need all this infrastructure to even be entertained, let alone, find enjoyment. But if you've got somebody who, like, can just be completely dumbfounded and, made wistful by clouds, there's not enough things you can take from that person to really hold them down. They will always find some reason for joy. And they will find this delight that is just present. It's God's gift. Hey, he made a wonderful world, and we've tried our best with it, but there's still a lot of wonder in it,
Careful now. If you make people too content with simple things, you collapse capitalism in the process.
Well,
There's that's actually by the way one of my arguments for memorizing poetry. I am fortunate enough to have a particular gift for that. I have a very good verbal memory, and I'm aware that not everyone has that. But I think most people can do some, and I think memorizing poetry is good, among other things, because once you have a few of them memorized and you manage to get a few of them that just stick there for good, you're never really alone. In a really bad time, I could have you could take away my entire library here, and I could still have a conversation of sorts in my head with G.K. Chesterton and Rudyard Kipling and Thomas Hardy. Because they're as long as I have a functioning brain, which admittedly that's not forever either. Hopefully a good while longer. But what was one thing with me on stanza 5, teach us to look in all our ends on thee for judge and not our friends. And it's interesting to me because that's at the same time that's a good goal and that's a good sentiment, but we also have to be realistic and understand that human beings were created as social creatures. We are not supposed to make a go of it entirely on our own. That's not our natural state, and spiritually, if we try that, we're very likely to end up in weird and possibly very destructive places. And so which is why in Hebrews it says don't give up meeting together. You need to get together with other Christians. You need to have what's in your head and your heart checked against other Christians to keep you in line. And so it's
Lewis in his lecture on philia, he says that every group of friends is a resistance movement against every other person on earth and every other system on earth. And so it's important that you choose your friends wisely, because the beliefs among a group of friends are going to be shared and fortified among those friends. And so, if they're good beliefs, they will tend to make the group better. And you can, rise to become really excellent men via this, sharpening of one another. But if they are poor beliefs, then they will drag you down and cause you to become scoundrels. And so what you're saying is exactly right for that reason. You have to, make sure that when you're picking your friends in society, that you pick friends in society that have these same worthwhile beliefs you do, and that judge by the same golden standard. I'll be C.S. Lewis, man. I just had good things to say.
So while you've been talking, I actually just sort of jotted down stanzas 2 through 7, like a word to represent them, and I may get it wrong, but I've got humility, endurance, discipline, courage, compassion, and joy. And I consider all of those things good things, and I think That feels like the heart of the poem to me.
That's actually emotionally, yeah, that's a very good summary. So, but let me look at this again, see what else I wanted to.
Well, it's worth pointing out that when he says that we can walk uncowed, it's not just fear, it's also favor, because that is the other side of the coin that is sometimes forgotten. There are those who will be swayed by the crowd because of the adulation of the crowd instead of the fear of being cast out. Now, obviously, there are some men for whom that's very obviously a temptation. Politicians certainly come to mind. For them, it's sort of a combination both of that venal fear and also the favor of the crowd. But a man who receives the adulation of others always runs that risk of becoming essentially too full of himself, or of no longer being willing to pursue the truth because he could lose the approval of that crowd. And so it's important to focus on the truth, not just for those instances in which you could be silenced due to fear, but in which you would silence yourself because you might lose that approval.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess that's also what was First Timothy. They will have itching ears, you know, and it's and it's and the other thing with that is like in every country in every age, there's different. The crowd is going to be going a different way, and in one time they're likely to make a mistake too far in this direction. In another time, they're making this other mistake, and I, I forget. I think I'm borrowing this from somebody, but I can't think of who. But like, humanity is like a drunkard, trying to walk straight down a road, and at one moment he's lurching over this way, and he manages to right himself, and the next 5 minutes later he's almost stumbling into the other ditch, and like there's no the trying to navigate your opinions by the crowd will eventually drive you insane. And it is a little bit of kind of bumper sticker theology, but at the same time, like things like that only catch on because there is at least a little truth in them. But like one man plus God is a majority, and so like if you are pursuing what is genuinely right, and everyone else is looking at you like you're crazy, you have to keep going. And at the same time, like when you also have to keep in mind that when you feel that way, if you feel like I'm fighting this fight, I'm trying to do what is right, and I am all alone here, I don't know how I'm going to keep going, I have no allies, why am I so lost? By the way, that was in the Bible, and God said to. I sometimes have trouble with Elijah and Elisha. I think that was Elijah, but sorry.
Elisha.
Oh, okay. It was the second one. Anyway, but it was Elisha, and he said, God, like I'm the only prophet left, and they're coming after me, and they're gonna kill me. Like, what are you doing here? And God said, like, look, you feel all alone, but like you don't know it, but there are 7,000, faithful, followers out there that you've never seen. And even if you fall, they're going to keep going, and all is not lost. And
also, here's some food, take a nap.
And it was Elijah with a J. That is Elijah, not Elisha.
Ja?
Yep, that's a J.
Oh,
and
Elisha watched Elijah go to heaven.
Yeah.
And did similar.
Elisha was crankier.
His own adventures.
They were both cranky, but Elisha was crankier. So, which is
Well,
almost
and
an achievement.
Yeah, I mean that. Well, I mean the first one, like his second miracle is calling down bears on a bunch of guys that were disrespecting him. It's like, dang.
In fairness,
Boys.
being a prophet to
Boys.
Old Testament Israel is a pretty terrible job. So
Oh,
being a
God.
little cranky is entirely justified.
that
Think how
actually
many times God was cranky about it. It's not just the
I
prophets.
mean, that's fair enough. He's like
I mean,
hard.
Moses had to intercede, what, a half dozen times when God said, walk away from me so I can kill them all? So,
Yeah, it's like turn around, Moses, and don't listen. It's like, and forget what you're about to hear. God, no, please don't do that. Fine, Moses, because you asked. Like
haggling with God.
well, that
for
was
the fate of a nation. He's like, I can still fulfill my promise to Abraham through you alone.
Which is
that was
completely true.
one. That is one fun thing about the story of Lot escaping Sodom. The Bible doesn't actually say this, and this is a little bit of I feel a little dirty because this is a little bit of like Talmudic kind of reasoning. But like, okay, God said, Abraham got God down to like if there's 10 good people left in that city, you're not going to destroy it, right? And God's like, okay, 10 good people, and Lot and Abraham stopped there. One possible interpretation of that is there were 10 good people and God got Lot out, and then there were only 9. You don't have to read the story that way, but I think it is kind of funny to think about like the 9 other righteous guys. Like, wait, what? No.
Yeah,
And just the
I don't know,
haggling
man.
with God also.
When I'm not sure Lot was a righteous man either, because they're like, hey,
Well,
send those
the
handsome
scripture
dudes
does
out here
call
so
him
they can
righteous.
Yeah.
So
And he's like, how about my daughters instead? And they're like, how about I
scripture
send
calls
out
him righteous, but he was certainly imperfect, which is true
Yeah.
of all, even righteous men. There's only
True.
one perfect righteous man, other than all the ones who are now dead and risen again, since they're perfect now.
Christianity's
But
hard.
the haggling really is basically just the classical Jewish joke of, why do you need $100, $80? Why do you need $60, $40? Here's a 20.
Well, I mean, but at the same time, like God went with it. So like, there is a certain lesson there in like, look, just ask. You might not get it. God might not go with you on this, but you can ask. And if you're not asking something that is basically deliberately insulting him, why not? Why not
We are
ask
told to
and
be
find
bold
out?
in prayer, so I mean, we ask for rather a lot in the Lord's Prayer if you actually look at what it is we're asking for God to do. I mean, when you ask for your daily bread, you're asking for all of the things you need to enjoy your daily bread, which is everything from good government to crops to not having pests to have a wife to make the bread. It's all sorts of things you're asking for in that one petition.
Again, now I want my wife to make bread. How dare you do this to me? She makes delicious.
As long as it's sourdough bread.
Okay. Well,
anything else to
and
say?
the quote about the drunkard, you may have been thinking, again, incidentally, of C.S. Lewis, who was incidentally quoting Luther, because one of the comments Luther makes is about putting a drunken peasant back on his horse and him falling off the other side, which obviously through a game of telephone over the centuries becomes many different forms. And I know that Lewis uses that in one of his books referencing Luther and may have used it in another form elsewhere.
Well, and there's another form of the same idea. Chesterton says, like, there are an infinite number of angles at which a man can fall down, but there's only one angle at which he's going to stand upright. And there are many, many ways for an individual and an entire society to go wrong. There's very, very few in which it's going to, keep running and for any length of time.
Well, that brings to mind, what is it, the opening line of Anna Karenina? All happy families are alike. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own way.
I
We're
have
back to
heard
the
that
good.
line.
There's only one good.
I am dreadfully deficient on Russian literature, although I have read a fair number of other things.
As long as you make a chart for all of the different names each character has, you'll be fine.
Oh, okay. It's kind of like Gandalf, who is also known as Mithrandir, and okay.
Except much longer, harder to pronounce, and about 17 more.
Yeah. No, I read like a couple of Russian novels. I don't even remember which ones, to be honest with you. But
well, clearly you start with War and Peace, right?
Like the first one I read, I was in like high school, and I was like, "What? Who? What?" And I had to go like, "Oh my God, this is the 6th time I've looked up this guy because some rando bumps in out of the taiga and is like, oh hey, name." You're like, "Wait, who's he talking to?" You're like, "Oh, he's talking to the protagonist. 8th name for this one guy." You're like, so the man's got, 4 given names and his family name, and then he's got his title, and then he's got his nicknames and the, various sort of diminutives of his given names. They're like, oh God, why? Like, this is Johnny.
It makes all of the names of German nobility seem very tame and reasonable in comparison, even when they have 7 of them and they're all 15 characters long. Because at least there's only one name.
Yeah. And they'll probably keep calling that guy that name.
Yes. And usually just the last name, thankfully, for Germans. It makes it very easy.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, I love it.
So this is a serious conversation. And one thing I've learned about drunken men is, I learned fairly early on, do not have a serious conversation with a drunken man, because they won't remember in the morning.
Very few, at least, yes. Or have a serious conversation with him if you don't want him to remember it.
It's a
well, have a serious conversation with him if you want him to be honest with you.
Yes. Drunken men tend to be a little more honest, depending on how drunk.
It's the alcoholic seal of confession. They're not.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I once had a girl that, I had a girl tell me she loved me one time because she was like just hammered, and I was like, huh, she really does.
Yeah.
Well,
I think every European society has some saying about alcoholics being truthful.
Well, we have been going for about an hour now. I think I've said most of the things I wanted to say about this poem. Nate, I think you just said you got your part in. Travis, any last thoughts from you tonight?
No, I think I've said what I need to. Thanks.
And Corey, any last thoughts on Kipling's children's song you would like to put in before we close out for the evening?
Well, it's Kipling, so we could go for another hour, but I think I've said enough for tonight anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining me. To those of you in the audience, thank you for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and God be with you.